Claire tied up the trash bag and opened the back door, stepping out into the soft hush of a late afternoon. The wind was light, brushing against her face like the memory of a touch. The scent of fresh-cut grass lingered faintly in the air, mixing with the dry, papery smell of fallen leaves that had yet to be cleared from the narrow walkway leading to the shared garbage container beside the fence. As she walked slowly, the weight of the trash bag felt oddly symbolic-like. She was dragging more than just discarded waste behind her. In the quiet, something in her chest loosened, some part of the unspoken heaviness that had been tightening its grip since the house had begun to feel less like a home and more like a corridor of tension. Just as Claire lifted the lid of the container, she heard the sound of slippers shuffling along the pavement, the soft, uncertain rhythm of an older person's gait. She glanced to her left and saw Mrs. Daniels, her neighbor, watering a line of weary-looking geraniums by the fence. Mrs. Daniels had lived alone for over 10 years, a quiet presence in the neighborhood. Claire offered a polite smile and a quiet, "Hello." The older woman looked up, nodded faintly, and then, without warning, asked in a voice that sounded more like a musing thought than a question, "Is the little one better? I saw her yesterday through the window, sitting quietly, reading." Claire paused, hand still holding the lid. "Yes, she's better, thank you." She tried to make her voice sound even casual. There was a beat of silence. Then Mrs. Daniels continued slowly. "Last week, Tuesday night, I think, I heard her crying. It was late, very late." Claire froze, her fingers stiffened on the container's edge. The air suddenly felt colder. "Crying?" she asked, softly, turning slightly. To face her neighbor, Mrs. Daniels nodded, the hose in her hand now dripping quietly onto the soil. "Yes, crying hard. Not just a child's whining it, was the kind of crying that sounds like pain, like something inside is breaking. It came through my window, clear even through the wind." Claire's face remained composed, but her heart clenched. "Are you sure it was Tuesday night?" "I'm sure," Mrs. Daniels replied. "I stayed up late reading. My window was open." The crying echoed, weak but unmistakable, like she was choking between sobs. She paused again, her voice now paper-thin. "It's not the first time, you know. I didn't want to intrude, but there are some sounds that just shouldn't come from a child, especially not in the middle of the night." Claire nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said quietly. Mrs. Daniels turned away, returning to her flowers, her voice barely audible over the running water. "I don't interfere in others' business, but sometimes it feels wrong to stay silent." Claire walked back into the house, every step like treading over broken tiles. Tuesday night, that was the night she had been out of town. She had returned the following day to find Emily with a fever, too tired to speak. The dates lined up. The implication was a knife in her side. That evening, after giving Emily her medicine and preparing her for bed, Claire sat beside her with a children's picture book, something soft and sweet, filled with foxes and stars. And dreams. Emily lay quietly, her little body still under the covers, her hands hidden. Claire read slowly, but her eyes kept flickering to Emily's left wrist, remembering how swollen it had been a few days ago. The bruising had faded, but the stiffness hadn't. Emily still kept that hand tucked beneath the blanket, unmoving, like it no longer belonged to her. After finishing the story and planting a soft kiss on her daughter's forehead, Claire pulled the blanket up to Emily's chin and quietly left the room. As she passed the bathroom door, she heard the faint sound of running water. Curious, she paused, then pushed the door open slightly. Emily stood at the sink in her pajamas, scrubbing her hands over and over. Water had soaked the front of her shirts. Her head was bowed. Claire stepped in gently. "Emily," the girl froze. Her hands stiffened, mid-scrub, but she didn't look up. "What are you doing, honey?" Claire asked gently. "I'm washing my hands," Emily replied in a whisper. Her voice was hollow, disconnected. "It's very late. Why aren't you in bed?" There was silence. Then Emily lifted her head slightly. Her eyes were distant, the way a person might look at a door they didn't dare open. "He said I was dirty," she murmured. "Very dirty. I have to wash." Claire's heart cracked. She went to her, knelt beside her, and wrapped her arms around her damp body. Emily didn't resist. She didn't cry. She just stood there, small and still, like a child who had been in the rain for far too long. "You're not dirty, baby," Claire whispered, pressing her lips to her daughter's temple. "No one has the right to say that to you. No one." A moment later, Emily began to tremble quietly, almost imperceptibly. Like a leaf shaking in the wind, Claire turned off the tap, dried her daughter's hands, and carried her back to bed. Emily said nothing else, but just before she closed her eyes, she whispered, "Mommy, don't make him angry again." Claire didn't sleep that night. She sat beside the bed, staring into the shadows, her body still and her mind racing. In the morning, she reviewed the hallway security camera footage. There was no camera inside the bathroom, but she watched the moment Emily left her bedroom at 11:05 p.m. 15 seconds later, Victor opened the door to the master bedroom, looked after her, then closed it again without a word. He knew, and he did nothing. That afternoon, Claire wrote a list. Not a diary, not a letter, just a cold, factual list. Mrs. Daniels confirmed crying on Tuesday night, swelling on left wrist, consistent with force hallway camera footage, 11:05 p.m. Emily enters bathroom. Victor opens door, watches, says nothing obsessive hand-washing Emily. He said I was dirty. She put down the pen. Her hand was cold. But inside, something began to warm, not hope exactly, but a kind of will, the will to act, the will to protect. The next day, during her lunch break, Claire went to Emily's school. She didn't give many details at the front desk, just that she needed to speak to the homeroom teacher privately. She was led to a small meeting room with soft lighting and drawn curtains. Miss Helen entered a few minutes later. She was a petite woman in her 30s, hair tied up, a gentle face worn by too many quiet worries. Claire didn't waste time. "I'm sorry for the unannounced visit," she said. I want to know if you've noticed anything unusual about Emily lately. Anything at all." Miss Helen hesitated. Emily is a very sweet girl, very well behaved, very quiet, but that's the thing, too quiet. She looked down, then continued. "She's been asking to go to the bathroom during every class, sometimes twice. When I ask if she's sick, she just shakes her head. Once I followed her, just to check. She was standing in the stall, not doing anything, just standing." Claire felt the walls around her shift. Her breath caught. "I asked her what was wrong," Miss Helen said. "She told me, I haven't studied enough. I'm making Mommy sad." Claire's chest tightened. "Do you think she meant school? Studies?" "I don't think so," Miss Helen said softly. It sounded different, like a rehearsed answer. After the meeting, Claire stood in the hallway, unsure if she was about to collapse or explode. Before she could turn to leave, a little girl with 2 braids approached her shyly. "Are you Emily's mom?" "Yes," Claire said, kneeling down. "Are you her friend?" The girl nodded. "I'm Lucy. We sit together sometimes." Claire smiled. "It's lovely to meet you." Lucy leaned closer, her voice lowering. "Emily's sad," she said. "She's being punished. She has to read times tables 100 times at home. She said if she gets something wrong, she can't sit. She has to stand and read." The bell rang. Lucy ran off. Claire stood frozen in place, as if the world had been drained of all sound. Later that day, after Victor went out to get medicine for his mother, Claire went upstairs. Emily was reading in the living room, unaware. Claire quietly entered her daughter's room. It was neat, too neat, not a single toy out of place. She opened the low bookshelf cabinet and found the plastic learning board. The marker had dried, but the messages were still visible. "I must be good. I must not make Mom sad. I must not say wrong. I must not say wrong. I must not say wrong 3 times. The pen had pressed so hard the board was dented. Claire sat down, her hands trembling. There were no childish drawings on the board. No stick figures, no silly scribbles, just commands, repetitions. Programming. Victor never shouted, never raised his hand. But he had been turning Emily into something quiet, something obedient, something small. That night, Claire held her daughter close as she slept. For the first time in weeks, Emily allowed her head to rest on her mother's chest. Her breath was uneven, shallow. Claire didn't sing. She didn't whisper anything comforting. She just held her and planned she would gather evidence. She would protect her daughter. And she would not let Emily be swallowed by the silence any longer. The soft buzz of the ceiling fan did little to break the tense silence inside the house. Claire sat on the edge of her bed, her eyes fixed on the faint glow of the hallway camera footage replaying on her phone. The clip lasted only a few seconds. Emily, stepping quietly out of her room, Victor appearing moments later, peeking out of the master bedroom, and then closing the door again. That was all. No shouting, no violence, just a silence so cold and heavy it made Claire's chest constrict. But it wasn't the silence of peace, it was the silence of permission. Victor had seen Emily, known she was awake, and chose to do nothing. That knowledge broke something in Claire that night. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was a quiet certainty that had rooted itself in her bones. Something had happened to Emily in her absence, something she couldn't ignore. After Emily fell asleep that evening, Claire walked to her study and began writing. Not an emotional confession, but a ledger of things that no longer added up. Tuesday night, confirmed crying by a neighbor. Emily's left wrist, signs of swelling. Hallway footage recorded movement at 11:05 p.m. Emily's behavior, obsessive hand-washing. Words, he said I was dirty. Claire's handwriting was firm, her jaw clenched. This wasn't guesswork anymore. This was gathering proof. She needed to build a wall of facts strong enough to protect her daughter. For the first time in days, her trembling stopped not from relief, but from resolve. The next day, Claire visited Emily's school under the pretense of dropping off paperwork. She asked to speak with Emily's homeroom teacher privately. Miss Helen, a petite woman with tired eyes and a clipped bun, welcomed her into a small office. When Claire asked if she'd noticed any recent changes in Emily, the teacher hesitated. Emily is a good student, very polite, but she trailed off, glancing at her hands. She's been asking to go to the bathroom during every class, sometimes twice. I once followed her discreetly. She just stood inside the stall, not crying, just quiet, looking down. Her eyes were red, though. When I asked, she said she was. Trying not to make her mom sad, Claire felt her throat tighten, her pulse pound against her ears. Miss Helen continued gently. It felt off, like she wasn't talking about grades or behavior, more like life at home. Claire thanked her, managing to keep her voice even, but her insides were unraveling. Her daughter, her gentle, kind daughter, was hiding from something even in school. On her way out, Claire paused in the hallway near the playground. The bell had rung, and children scattered like birds in the yard. Just as she turned to leave, a small voice behind her said, "Miss, are you Emily's mommy?" Claire turned. A girl with braids and a loose shirt looked up at her. "Yes," Claire replied gently. "Are you Lucy?" Lucy nodded. "Emily's. Sad lately. She says she's being punished at home. She has to read times tables over and over, can't sit down to do it, has to stand." Claire crouched to eye level, her face neutral, her heart boiling. "Punished for what?" she asked softly. She didn't say, just that she has to say everything right, or it makes someone angry. The bell rang again, and Lucy darted away. Claire stood frozen. It wasn't just happening, it was ongoing. Her child's life had become a maze of invisible wires, and every misstep came with invisible pain. That evening, Claire waited until Victor left, claiming he needed to pick up medicine for his mother. Emily was reading on the couch, her legs curled beneath her. Claire walked upstairs and entered her daughter's room. Everything was neatly arranged, almost too perfect. But behind the small bookshelf, she found a child's writing board used for learning letters and drawing. The marker had dried, but its indentations remained. She read the words slowly. "I must be good. I must not say wrong. I must not talk outside the lesson." The last line was etched deep, repeated again and again until the board was dented. Claire felt like the words were knives against her skin. She sat down on the edge of the bed and held the board. Victor hadn't laid a hand on Emily, not that she'd seen, but he didn't have to. He had conditioned her into silence, into fear, into robotic compliance. He'd whispered rules into her mind until they became gospel. That night, Claire held Emily to sleep, her arms tight around the small frame, just like when Emily had been 3. Her daughter didn't protest. She simply breathed, shuddering occasionally, her small body seeking safety. It no longer knew how to name Dot. At 2:15 a.m., Claire couldn't sleep. She sat at the dining table, sipping water, her mind racing. She opened her browser and typed, "Signs of emotional abuse in children." The page loaded slowly, but every line felt like a blade carving truth into her. Avoidance of eye contact. fear of making mistakes, compulsive obedience, self-blame, obsessive hygiene, withdrawal, repression of imagination. Claire checked every symptom against her daughter like a doctor checking a pulse. Every one was a match. The next morning, she opened a new document on her laptop. At the top, she wrote, Emily Protection Plan, Phase 1. She saved screenshots, time-stamped footage, the writing board photo, and made a call to a free legal aid clinic. That same day, she scheduled an appointment at a children's psychological support center. Claire wasn't going to wait for another sign. She had seen enough. 3 days later, she put her plan in motion. That morning, she told Victor she had a meeting in town and wouldn't be back until late afternoon. He nodded without looking up from his phone. Emily, sitting quietly at the breakfast table, gave her a soft goodbye. Claire's voice trembled slightly when she said, I'll see you later, honey. But inside, she was steel. Claire had set everything up. Her second phone, outfitted with a tiny night vision camera and wide-angle lens, fully charged, memory wiped. The small auxiliary door by the kitchen rarely used was still oiled and silent. She had rehearsed this like a heist. She drove away, circled the neighborhood, and parked 2 houses down. When Victor believed she was gone, she returned, slipped through the kitchen entry, and hid in the cramped, dark storage space adjacent to Victor's study. Between the storage and the study wall, there was a crack just wide enough to fit the camera lens. She crouched, breath held, heart-pounding dot. At precisely 4:15 p.m., she heard Victor's voice. Calm, cold. The door opened. Emily's small figure entered, her shoulders already drooped. He stood above her, red pen in hand, setting papers on the desk. The footage showed everything. Emily stood awkwardly beside the desk. Victor gestured at her workbook, his mouth moving with phrases Claire didn't need to hear to understand. When Emily's lips moved, I'm sleepy, Victor grabbed her hand, yanked her to her feet, then shoved her back into the chair. His hand gripped her shoulder hard, his face lowered close to hers, his lips forming the word, ashamed. Claire couldn't wait anymore. She kicked open the door of the storage room, stepping into the study like thunder breaking through silence. Don't touch her again. Her voice cracked like lightning. Victor spun around, shock on his face. His grip on Emily released. Emily staggered back, hands over her head. Claire stepped forward, holding up the phone with the blinking red light. I've been recording everything. This ends now. Victor's expression shifted from confusion to calculation. You're misunderstanding, he said smoothly. You always overreact. Claire took another step. Misunderstanding is when a child sleeps like she's preparing for war. When she washes her hands like she's scrubbing off shame. When her drawings disappear because imagination is punished. That's not parenting. That's control. Victor moved forward. You're ruining this family over a few bad days. Claire's eyes didn't flinch. No, I'm saving my daughter. From you, she turned to Emily. Come here, baby. The girl hesitated only for a moment before running into her mother's arms. Claire wrapped herself around her daughter and took a second phone from her pocket, already dialing. I'd like to report a case of child abuse. I have video evidence. Victor stepped back, his composure cracking. You're playing with the law. No, Claire replied. I'm using it. The rain outside began to pour, as if the world itself was exhaling with her. At that moment, Claire knew she had stepped through the storm, and she was never going back. The sound of a tied trash bag rustling in her hand was the only noise Claire heard as she opened the back door and stepped onto the concrete. The quiet was calming quiet in a way that reminded her something inside had been restless for days. The air outside was cool. The scent of fresh-cut grass mixed with the brittle smell of dried leaves scattered near the fence. Her steps were slow, deliberate, as if her body was trying to keep pace with the weight on her heart. She walked toward the shared garbage container beside the backyard fence, opened the lid, and dropped the bag inside. That's when she heard a light shuffle of slippers on pavement. Claire turned her head instinctively and saw Mrs. Daniels, her neighbor, standing by her side of the fence, watering her potted geraniums. The older woman had lived there alone for over a decade. She was rarely seen and even more rarely heard, but her presence was always felt like a soft shadow at the edge of every quiet moment. Claire offered a polite smile. Hello, Mrs. Daniels looked up, her eyes narrowed slightly under the weight of memory. She nodded slowly. Is the little one better? she asked, her voice rough like dry leaves. I saw her sitting and reading a book yesterday through the window. Claire nodded. Yes, thank you, she's better. The words were automatic, mechanical. But she paused. Something in Mrs. Daniels' voice wasn't casual. Mrs. Daniels kept watering, as if speaking to the air. Last week, Tuesday night, I think I heard her crying. Claire froze. Crying so hard, Claire's stomach turned. Tuesday. Her voice was barely a whisper. Mrs. Daniels nodded. Yes, I stayed up late. The window was open. I could hear it clearly, like she was choking. Not loud, but sharp, like her throat was closing. And it's not the first time either. Claire's hands felt cold. Are you sure it was Tuesday? Yes, she said. I remember because I couldn't sleep that night. But then every morning I see her going to school, her uniform neat, her hair combed. I didn't want to interfere, but her eyes turned slightly toward Claire now. Some sounds don't belong to the night, especially not from a child. Claire's voice caught in her throat. Thank you, she managed. Mrs. Daniels nodded again. It's nothing. I don't poke into others' homes, just thought someone should know. Claire walked back into the house as if her feet had no bones. The door clicked shut behind her, but inside her mind, the world was coming undone. Claire had been out of town that night, traveling for work. She had called Emily to check on her. Emily had said she was fine, a little tired. The next day, she'd developed a mild fever, and Victor had chalked it up to the change in weather. But now, Claire's mind raced. The crying so hard it echoed through a closed window, and Emily hadn't said a word. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. That night, after dinner, Claire helped Emily into bed. She folded away her toys, picked out a storybook, and sat beside her under the warm yellow glow of the nightlight. The soft whir of the ceiling fan cast their shadows on the wall, flickering with every small motion. What should we read tonight? Claire asked. The Fox one, Emily said, her voice small, but clearer than it had been in days. Claire read slowly, letting her voice rise and fall like the tide. But she couldn't help glancing at her daughter's wrist. The swelling had gone. Down, barely noticeable now. But the way Emily kept her hand under the blanket, rigid and still, made Claire's throat tighten. When the story ended, she kissed Emily's forehead and whispered, "Sleep well, sweetheart." Then she turned off the lamp and stepped out into the hallway as she passed the bathroom. The faint sound of water caught her attention. Not rushing, not loud, just steady, repetitive. Claire frowned, paused, and slowly pushed the door open. Emily stood at the sink in her pajamas, her head bowed. Her small hands scrubbed at each other under the cold water, soaking the sleeves of her shirt. She didn't notice her mother at first. Claire took a step inside. "Emily," she said softly. Emily froze, her shoulders stiffened, her hands stayed. Mid-air, dripping. "What are you doing, honey?" "I'm washing my hands," she whispered. "It's late, sweetheart." "Why aren't you in bed?" Emily looked up. Her eyes, those soft brown eyes that once sparkled, were now flat, glassy, distant. "He said I was dirty," she said simply. "Very dirty. I have to wash." The words hit Claire like a punch. She moved forward, kneeling beside her daughter. Wrapping her arms around her, Emily didn't resist, didn't respond. Her arms stayed limp at her sides, the water trailing down onto Claire's shoulder. Claire held her tightly. "You are not dirty," she whispered. "No one has the right to say that. No one, ever." Emily's small body began to shake not. Sobbing, not crying, but trembling like a leaf that had been hanging on too long in the wind. Claire reached for a towel, gently dried her hands, and carried her back to bed. She tucked her in, but Emily didn't say another word. Just as Claire reached to turn off the lamp, her daughter whispered, "Don't make him angry anymore, Mommy." Claire sat in the dark beside her for hours, unable to sleep. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't seeing the room. She was replaying every moment, every whisper, every shadow in the past few weeks. Slowly, she rose, walked to her study, and opened the hallway camera feed on her phone. There was no camera inside the bathroom, but the hallway camera had captured it all. At 11:05 p.m. on Tuesday night, Emily had opened her bedroom door and walked into the bathroom. 15 seconds later, Victor opened the master bedroom door. He looked out, saw her, paused, and closed the door again. That was all. No action. Concern, just surveillance. Claire stared at the screen. That small movement said everything. He saw her, and he didn't care. He let her cry. Let her break. The next morning, Claire could hardly focus. She walked Emily to school and returned home. Her hands trembled as she wrote down each detail. Her pen pressed harder with every sentence. The crying, the camera footage, the wrist, the obsessive hand-washing, the words, "I'm dirty." It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was evidence. That afternoon, she returned to Emily's room and opened the writing board hidden behind. Her bookshelf, the marker was nearly gone, but the indentations were deep. She traced them with her fingers. I must be good. I must be quiet. I must not say wrong. I must not say wrong. I must not say wrong. That last line was etched 3 times, the grooves so deep they bent the board. Claire didn't cry. She sat down slowly and clenched her fists in her lap. The words were carved not only into the plastic, but into Emily's heart. This wasn't discipline. It was programming. Not yelling, not hitting, but erasure. Victor hadn't bruised her skin. He'd bruised her soul. That night, Claire sat beside Emily's bed as she fell asleep, her breathing uneven, shoulders stiff, even in rest. Claire held her hand. After her daughter drifted off, Claire took out her phone again, opened a search engine, and typed, "Symptoms of psychological abuse." In children, the list made her sick. Fear of making mistakes, obsessive compliance, distorted self-image, aversion to adult interaction, internalized guilt, dissociation, suppression of imagination. Claire checked each one off in her mind like a grim inventory. Every box matched, she moved on to a new search. Behavioral control disguised as parenting. The results gave her shivers, forcing children to repeat lessons as punishment. Using shame as a teaching tool, monitoring their thoughts, teaching them to self-correct, punishing emotional responses, rewarding silence. Everything Victor had done was textbook. Claire looked up from her phone to the quiet room. Emily's favorite plush toy, Mr. Buttons, lay untouched. Her drawings were gone from the wall. The sparkle that once filled her imagination had been wiped. Cleaned out Victor hadn't just silenced Emily. He had stolen her childhood. Claire stood up and walked to the desk. She pulled out a blank sheet of paper. At the top, she wrote in bold strokes, "Emily Protection Plan, Phase 1. Then she began to list everything, the evidence, the timeline, the next steps, and she knew she was going to war. The courtroom door slammed behind Victor, leaving a sharp silence in its wake. Inside, the air seemed to pause. Claire didn't move, holding Emily close as the cold that had once come from fear now quietly lifted. It wasn't warmth yet, but it was something else, something freer. The screen of the phone she still held reflected against her face, a soft blue glow across her cheekbone. The recording was still running. She stopped it with a gentle press of her thumb and kissed Emily's forehead. A simple act, quiet, but it marked a turning. From that day forward, Claire promised herself she would never be silent again. The preliminary hearing for the custody case was held in a weathered 3-story building, the paint peeling in places as if the structure had heard too many stories like this. Gray and imposing, it stood surrounded by leafy trees that moved gently in the July breeze. The inside was quiet, not serene, but solemn. People spoke in low tones, shoes tapping against old tile. Claire sat in the second row, her lawyer beside her, a tall, silver-haired woman named Marianne with a voice like water, hitting stones steady and clear. Across from them sat Victor in a pressed gray suit, expression unreadable. His hands were clasped tightly together on the table. Cold eyes, eyes that still believed in control. The seat beside him was occupied by his attorney, a sharp man in his 40s, who looked more like a banker than a defender of troubled men. A few feet behind them sat a psychologist from the Department of Child Services. Dr. Patelhu had interviewed Emily the previous day. She wore a navy blouse, a quiet sadness in her eyes. Her file rested on her lap, a blue folder sealed with a simple clip. The judge entered, a man in his late 60s, eyes heavy with years. Experience etched into the lines around his mouth. His voice was low and firm as he opened the session. "We are gathered to consider the custody and welfare of the minor, Emily W., and the allegations of emotional and psychological abuse against the respondent, Mr. Victor W. Claire didn't lean back in her seat. She sat upright, fingers wrapped around the edge of her file bag, as though anchoring herself. She felt her heart thudding in her chest, but her breathing was even. She had trained herself for this. Not with speeches, but with memory. She didn't live as script. Her truth had been lived, not rehearsed. Marianne rose first. "Your Honor," she began calmly, "we are submitting audiovisual evidence gathered from a hidden, legally permissible source within the shared home, documenting a pattern of coercive behavior. We are also submitting photographic images of a child's learning board. Handwritten lines repeatedly stating, 'I must not say wrong, medical analysis.'" She moved toward the judge's bench, placing the files down carefully, her posture unwavering. The judge reviewed each submission methodically, his fingers turning the pages with care, not rushing. "Proceed," he said. Dr. Patel stood. "Emily W. presents no external injuries," she stated. "However, in my professional opinion, avoidance of eye contact, disrupted sleep patterns, self-blame, and heightened fear of making mistakes. These are not random behaviors. They indicate systematic emotional conditioning, sometimes more damaging than physical harm." Claire didn't. Look at Victor. She knew what was there. That same flat stare. His side remained still, the lawyer whispering occasionally but not interrupting. Victor's fingers remained clasped, controlled, coiled, when his attorney stood. He addressed the court with a calculated calm. "My client is strict, yes, but not abusive. There has been no physical harm, and all acts were done in what he believed was the child's best interest. We must distinguish discipline from harm. In today's climate, the lines are easily blurred." Victor spoke for the first time then. "I never hit her, never even raised my voice. I taught her discipline, silence, focus. She's a fragile girl. I was trying to give her tools to face the world. She needs strength, not softness. Then, why does she cry in her sleep, whispering, 'Don't lock the door'? Why does a 6-year-old scrub her skin raw at midnight, believing she's dirty? Why does her learning board have no drawings, just rules?" Over and over, "I must not say wrong," Victor tensed. "You're twisting everything," I guided her. "You suffocated her," Claire said flatly. She approached the bench and placed a printout from the video. Victor standing over Emily, hand gripping her shoulder. "This is not guidance," she said. "This is fear." The courtroom was silent. Even the judge paused longer than usual before speaking. The next 3 hours passed with testimonies, clarifications, and rebuttals. Finally, as the afternoon light faded outside the high windows, the judge returned with the verdict. The jury finds sufficient evidence that the defendant, Mr. Victor W., engaged in emotionally abusive behaviors that caused measurable psychological harm to the child, Emily W., based on professional evaluation, visual documentation, and consistent witness reports. We rule to strip Mr. W. of all custodial and contact rights. He is sentenced to an 18-month suspended sentence and ordered to undergo 12 months of behavioral re-education therapy. Custody is granted in full to Ms. Claire M. Claire didn't cry. She simply nodded, once, as if affirming what she had already decided long before this day. Victor didn't protest. He didn't stand. He sat motionless, staring into nothing. The image of a man who thought control was eternal and had just learned otherwise as Claire walked out of the courtroom holding Emily's hand. The sun met them. The road was still wet from an earlier rain, but the light broke through the clouds with gentle gold. Emily's grip was tight enough to turn Claire's fingers white, but it was no longer from fear. "And I will never let anyone hurt you again?" Emily didn't speak. But her smile, faint and featherlight, was the first real one in a long time. They moved to a new place. Claire had chosen it for one reason. Only it was quiet. The walls were thick. The neighborhood was slow. The balcony overlooked a park where low trees dropped leaves on tiled paths. No constant footsteps. Just enough distance from everything that had been done. Emily never asked for anything special. But that first night, Claire woke up at 2 a.m. to find her not in bed. At the dark yard below, where a single lamp lit the concrete, Claire didn't say her name. She just knelt beside her, placed a hand on hers. "I'm waiting for morning," Emily whispered, eyes still locked on the yard. "Why morning?" "Because evening is when people get angry," she replied. Claire didn't reply. She simply picked her up and carried her back to bed. No lullaby, no speech. just presence, and sometimes presence is enough. The next morning, they went to the Children's Psychological Center for their first therapy session. The room looked more like a playroom than a clinic. Crayons, beanbags, children's drawings taped on the walls. Dr. Anna welcomed them with soft eyes and no probing questions. She simply laid out crayons and asked, "Can we draw together?" Emily drew the sun, just the sun. A big, round, overlapping circle, nothing else. But it was a beginning. Over the next few sessions, trees appeared, then a small bird's nest. Then one day, she drew 2 figures, a child and a tall one with a hat. "Is that your mom?" Dr. Anna asked. Emily nodded, and for the first time added an arm reaching around the child's head. Claire stared at that drawing all night. Claire and Emily built their new home piece by piece. On weekends they shopped together, Emily choosing spoons, slippers, even the tablecloth, floral or stripes. Claire asked one day, "Which one doesn't get dirty fast?" Emily replied. Then her eyes widened. "Oh, I was joking," Claire smiled. It was the first time in months Emily had joked. They bought pale yellow curtains for her room. "It looks like early morning," Emily had said. That was enough. One windy night, Claire heard small steps in the hallway. Emily stood by her door holding the edge of her blanket. "Mom, can you turn off the lights for me?" Claire tucked her in, pulled the curtains, then lay down beside her. "I'm not scared anymore," Emily whispered. "Mom's here." Claire held her close, sang a song her own mother had sung years ago. Emily fell asleep before it ended, hands still in her mother's. One weekend, they visited a children's book fair. Claire read aloud to a small group of kids, while Emily sat in front holding a sun-shaped bookmark. Afterward, a young woman approached. "Are you the Claire M. who wrote the article? Children need to be heard." "Yes, I think. I think my son is being hurt by my ex. I've ignored it for months, but after reading your story, I'm listening now." Claire didn't say much. She just placed a hand on the woman's shoulder. Not advice, not a solution, just, "I understand." 6 months passed. Emily now walked to her new school with confidence. She no longer asked to go out 5 times per lesson. She had a best friend, Linda Loud, curious girl, who told silly ghost stories and taught her how to argue with the teacher respectfully. "Of course. I said, I don't want to be class president," Emily said one day. "This year, I just want to play with cats." "That's leading in its own way," Claire laughed. Emily wrote stories now. About a cat named Snowflake, who was scared of loud noises but learned how to listen to herself. Claire started writing again to not crime thrillers, but little pieces of truth, small blog posts. Her article received over 300 shares. Some left long letters, others just a sun emoji. And Claire, she felt that was enough. At the next book fair, she watched Emily helping a smaller child pick storybooks. She knelt, smiled, explained each book's world. When the wind blew her hair into her eyes, she didn't flinch. She let it fall. Then, tucked it back herself, Claire watched quietly. For a moment, she forgot to breathe. Emily turned, smiled faintly, and ran over. "I want to tell stories to Mom." "What kind?" "About Snowflake being scared, but learning she didn't have to be anymore." "Will she be okay?" Claire asked. "Yes," Emily nodded firmly, taking her mother's hand. "She will." And as they walked home, Claire looked up at the evening sky. The sun had dipped just past the rooftops, not too bright, but bright enough.